Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host, Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. Welcome, dear listener, for a new episode together with Laura Parr. And if this name might ring a bell to you, that might be because Laura and I did a LinkedIn Live earlier this year together, and we dive into a fundamental question. Is happiness more important than money? Indeed, Laura works with women to start and scale conscious businesses. She is passionate about empowering her clients, understanding their why. And once you'll know her story, you might realize how this sweet spot of hers came into play. This is what we hear today. So, Laura, thank you so much for accepting my invitation once again.
Oh, not a problem. Thank you again for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So, on that note, any chance that you can tell us more about you and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to call myself a conscious business coach. So for me, that kind of falls sort of the conscious thing. I often get asked to describe that. So that falls into two different things for me. And one is actually inspiring and helping my clients to add an element of consciousness or, sort of a social side to their business. So we look at not just scaling to create the money that they want and need to live their dream life. That's absolutely possible. But it's also then saying, well, what can you do about your business to be able to give back in some way, be it socially, be it environmentally? It might be how you sort of set your business up. It might be who you work with, that kind of thing. It's adding an element of philanthropy essentially into the business from day one, literally before you even start. The other side of a conscious business for me is also asking yourself some very conscious questions when you set up. I've been in business a long time. I come from a background of I owned my own property company and ran that for over a decade and then sold that a couple of years ago. I studied business as well. And in all of my time looking at both my businesses and everybody else's businesses that I've been working with or come across, not a lot of people actually ask themselves the conscious questions at the very beginning. Why am I setting this up? What is it that I want to get out of it? People jump into it very quickly thinking, oh, I've got this brilliant business idea and I'm going to make loads of money. And, I want to do that because I want to spend time with my kids. And you go, okay, brilliant. But then they don't really go any further than that, and then they might end up with a business that requires 100 hours a week to run. And, because they haven't sort of done any self-reflection, any self-work, they have issues passing things over and letting people sort of take the reins in some instances. And then before you know it, they are on family holidays with their laptop and trying to do things by the pool. And that's not, the intention that people start with, but it's, how we get there. And it's one of the reasons that the business failure rate is so large, and it's 50% within the first few years. So that's a huge number.
Massive.
And, I try to work with people to ask those questions, to do that work and to try and make sure that we can bring that number down, basically.
I love that. And I know I could hear how much of a passion it is. The question then I have is, what is it that you enjoy the most about what you do?
I think for me, I love working with my clients. I love working with the women that I work with, and I get really inspired when they come up with some amazing ideas. But I think the thing that maybe impassions me most is being able to get something socially conscious into the businesses, even when maybe they weren't thinking about it to begin with, and just knowing that I'm doing good all over. I love helping people and getting them to their dream life and their dream figure, and and that's absolutely brilliant. But also knowing that that business is either teaching people or helping people or doing something within the structure of the venture itself is just an added bonus, really.
I love it. And obviously, you've mentioned a lot in that introduction that I know we need to dive into, such as what happened in the previous career of yours, if we can put it this way, or at least the steps that led you to where you are today. Before we do that, one question I have for you is, what led you to where you are today?
So I studied business at university, and I just I didn't know it at the time, but I was just going through the motions, really. So I got a corporate job. I went into business consultancy with one of the top consultancy firms in London, and I did that for a couple of years. But it was very clear quite early on that it was not really my thing. I enjoyed meeting the clients. I enjoyed, certain aspects of it, but it didn't thrill me. And
Yeah.
so I started to look at alternatives, and I started to wonder what else was around, and what I could be doing. And I really knew I was in the wrong place when my boss came up to me and sort of said, "Look, Laura, we need to start thinking about promotion for you." And I just basically said, "Don't bother," because I knew for me
Oh,
that it
wow.
was gonna. Yeah, well, I mean, in hindsight, maybe I could have thought about it a little more, but I was in a position where if I was going to get promoted, and I already knew I was on the wrong ladder. And that's a big thing for me is,
Mm.
it's all well and good climbing a ladder, but if you're on the wrong one, you're getting further away from something that you actually want to be doing. So I hadn't realized how strong my feelings were to get out until he positioned the idea of, promotion on the table. He put it on the table, and I sort of went, that's going to cost me more time. I'm already working loads of hours. I was then spending all of my spare time, looking into property, which is something that I do love. And I thought, do I want to be spending the time in property, or do I want to be spending the time doing something that I already know that I actually don't really want to
Mm.
be doing? And as soon as you've lost that motivation, and as soon as you can't really see a clear path ahead of you, then it's time to jump ship. And that for
Yeah.
me was the signal that it wasn't going to work. I wasn't in the right place if I was already refusing promotion. So I actually, like I said, I've been spending some time researching property, and I'd got under the notion that, you needed money before you could start. And so I thought, well, I'll just do some research, and, maybe in 10, 15, 20 years when I've got some cash available, then, at least I know what I'm doing. And in my research, I realized that actually I didn't need any money, and there were, certain things that I could do, and there were joint venture projects that I could start or create, and so forth. And so when the whole promotion conversation happened, it made me realize, well, actually, I could do property now if I wanted to. So I started going to all these meetings, and, meeting different developers, and I caught one of their eyes. And one of them sort of said, "Oh, you'd be brilliant to run my London office." So he offered me a job. So I went there,
Nice.
and sort of, learned a little bit about how he was doing it and what to do. And I obviously, practiced with some of his clients essentially, and then eventually left him to go out on my own. And I ran my own property company for 10 years, but I'm essentially the
Nice.
product of my own sort of business, if that makes sense, because
It does.
even though I love property, I realize, I mean, there are so many facets to property, and I still love certain aspects of it, but I ended up falling into, but almost by accident, property management. And I hate that. I really, really hate that. And that's
Mm.
what I ended up doing until the bitter end. So it got to the end of 10 years, and I was incredibly demotivated. I hated
Mm.
everything that I was doing. And it's what ultimately pushed me to, make the change, and to sort of start asking my big conscious questions.
Yeah.
What was I doing? Why did I want to do it? What was important to me? All those sorts of different things, define my values, etc., etc. Yeah, eventually it led me to selling my company, and leaving, and doing what I now absolutely love. But I think hating my job for so long was actually a massive benefit, because if I hadn't, I probably wouldn't have had the guts to have sold it and leave. So that's
Yeah.
sort of my how I've managed to get to where I am.
And thank you for sharing. This is sort of what I alluded to into the introduction, because I thought we might probably get in there and understand a little bit more about you, and the sort of what happened. And the whole point is that in a minute, we're going to dive into your career achievements and your challenges. But I think you've already highlighted a few key major moments that have happened. And it's one of those where I'd love to have your views, but essentially when it comes to the situations that you're not supposed to be in the sense that either because it's not working for you anymore, or maybe you should have not gone in there in the first place, like whatever happens that led you to where you are, you've got a couple of options, but essentially making it your biggest strength and your biggest learning curve, and how this can actually fuel the next step that you'll be taking, whether personally or professionally, I think is one of the most valuable gift that you can give to yourself and also to others, right? Because what you've gone through, it's probably some of the things that your clients have been going through that you can truly help and support with. I mean, I obviously do resonate with that because this is what happened to me when it comes to burnout and so on. But anyhow, thank you very much for that. Thank you for answering my question. Let's have a look at your top 3 career achievements.
That is a tricky question. I would say, so back in my property days, I did some deal sourcing as well, and I did some developments and things like that. And I remember one of them, I sourced a deal that ultimately I had very, very little involvement in. And because it ended up being such a large deal and I had such a good connection, I ended up basically being able to take a very, very large sourcing fee for very, very little work. And it ended up being voted as Deal of the Year in
Wow.
one of the sort of property awards. And that almost came by accident, which was ironic, really, because I was trying so hard to, find deals and, do all this business. And I was actively searching and I was talking to all these sorts of different people. And this one literally fell in my back pocket almost. So it just goes to show that sometimes when you try too hard, you don't always get the result that you want. And I think I just relaxed a little bit on this one. And it was a connection that I already had. And that's what sort of, led me to get such a good deal for it, I think. So that I was quite proud of being able to say that I got the Deal of the Year on that one. But I was off getting married and traveling the world at that point. So I
Oh,
wouldn't really say
sorry,
it
I'm
was
busy having a personal life. That is
yeah,
amazing.
exactly. Yeah. It wasn't for bad reasons, but yes, it was good to be able to hand that one over and just let someone else deal with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one I would probably say was quite good. I think for me, selling my business was a real achievement, I think, because I'd built it up to be, and I'd say probably, the property business in itself, I built it up to around about sort of 750,000 a year. And it allowed me to, when I had my daughter about sort of 3.5, nearly 4 years ago, it allowed me to step back and I had somebody come in and manage everything for me, which basically meant that I could take as much maternity leave as I want because there was no pressure to go back. I could sort of, do what I wanted with my time. I didn't feel, I was really able to sort of let go and step back and just sort of, take a breather and not feel the need to work or need to get my head back into the game, that kind of thing. And the other benefit of that as well is that it allowed my husband to take shared paternity leave, which meant that he got about 6 months off when we had Rosie. So that
Amazing.
was lovely to be able to give him that. And, that only really came from the fact that I'd, been able to build the company to where it was and had the ability to bring somebody in to manage it. So that I think was a major, major achievement because that's something that I'd been working for quite some time, which is why it was, I guess, such a hard decision to let the business go. Because as much as I hated it, I had built it up to be something pretty decent and, it did what I needed it to do. But at the end of the day, you do just have to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? If you're, waking up and hating everything that you're doing, even if it is providing you money to do some other pretty cool thing, is that still okay? And to me, the answer was no. So I'd say I definitely say building up my company and being able to let it go.
How did you feel back then when that happened? I mean, obviously you knew the reason why this needed to happen, but like you said, after a decade, how did you feel? Was there a part of you that was sort of scared of the unknown? Were you just excited for the new chapter? Was it a mix of emotions? I'm curious to dive a little bit more into that.
Well, I think I'd been toying with the idea of selling it for quite some time. And I think if I'd tried selling it sort of 5 years earlier, which I'd thought about, it would have been too soon. And I'd have been left with feelings of, oh, but it was my baby and what could I have built it to? And, look at the opportunities and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But then it's going back to the principle that, we sort of touched on before of me getting into a worse position and feeling even worse about it and hating it rather than just kind of, not really liking it all that much, actually was what I needed to be able to sort of fuel the decision to go in, the end anyway. And when I actually came down to me selling it, I have no regrets. Absolutely no regrets. There was a very, very, very small part of me that was like, oh, it's my baby and what am I doing? But I literally got to the point where I just hated every second of everything that I did. And so I was counting down, the days until they took over. So in actual fact, I know it was the right decision for me, but I had to let it get worse before it would force me into the decision to sort of let go entirely, which I'm genuinely very, very grateful for, because if I hadn't have done that, who knows, I might still be running it and I'd be miserable. But I'd be sitting here making excuses going, well, it pays the bills and it allows me to do this and this. And I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to sit on a podcast like this today and say, I love what I do and I work with amazing people and this is what I'm going to try and achieve. Whereas I had no motivation for that in my last role.
I love this. Thank you so much. Don't want to interrupt the flow. Let us know about your final achievement.
Oh, blimey. Okay. So my final achievement, I think I've been growing this sort of business coaching company for a while, and I think my final achievement would probably be the fact that I've co-authored on 2 books recently, and
Mm.
I've managed to get into sort of such a beautiful community of amazing women. And I'm actually partaking in an event next week in London, which is all about, wealth and encouraging women to create their own wealth and to understand it from all different aspects. So, I'm coming at it from a sort of business and philanthropic side of things, but there are other women that are going to be there and talking about, investment and buying businesses and stocks and shares and, mindset and property and all these sorts of, different things. But I just love that I've been able to co-author with these amazing women, and that I
Mm.
can be involved in such an amazing event as well, because I think that it's only going to be the start of something bigger for me, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to take me, to be honest.
Oh, congrats. I love it. I mean, obviously,
Thank
I
you.
said tell us your final one, but like it's a top three. And I know there are many, many things that have happened, but I like the fact that you picked into sort of different pockets of your career journey as
Yeah,
well.
try to balance
Pretty
it
much,
out a little bit.
yeah, exactly. Pretty much one of each. And the one thing that I love and I'm taking away from hearing you just now is how, each of those different experiences, situations, those events that have happened have brought you to where you are today, in the sense that when they happen, obviously this was the right thing to happen, but you also knew some other things needed to happen. Like you're talking about this event that is happening. Did you say next week?
Yeah, 14th of September. So I know it'll be a little late for anyone possibly listening to the podcast, but it will happen again next year. So next week.
There we go. So you got this event next week. So who knows what's going to happen either next year or in the future that you want to contribute, you want to work on. I think it's
Mm.
one of those I've seen time and time again, and it's something you've mentioned briefly as well through the story so far, is sometimes people burden themselves by being the person they were at the beginning of their career journey, but you don't have to do
Mm.
that. It's okay to evolve. It's okay to embrace whatever situation comes your way, learn from it, achieve what needs to be achieved should there be an achievement on the way, but also explore other avenues if you know that there is like you were saying, another ladder calling you, or if you know you're in the wrong one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it is a bold decision because, for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, if they're in a good job and, they have dependents, they might have children, they
Yes.
might have, a mortgage, they might have all these sorts of different things, then it's not easy to say, well, screw it, let's just drop it all and start all over again.
Mm-hmm.
But I always ask the question, for me, it comes down to, we only have this one life. And if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're never going to be the best at it. And that for me was, I think, the turning point when I realized that, the strategy that I did for property, I was so good at it that I was known for it, and I taught it, I sort of coached it, I had clients that, I didn't just do it myself, but I actually taught people how to do it as well. And yet there were people that were starting and going faster than I was, and they would overtake me in terms of the number that I had, and it would frustrate me for so long. And in actual fact, I realized one day that I didn't care, and I didn't care because I didn't enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me was like, well, I'm never going to have a massive company in this. I either have to forget that I don't enjoy it and just knuckle
Mm-hmm.
down. But that was a lot of mental effort for me, because I'm not the kind of person that's prepared to do that. I don't like just to sort of accepting misery. There has to be sort of something that we can do about that. And it truly was making me pretty miserable. And therefore, I just knew that I was never going to be big in that industry again, because it was too much effort to sort of, rebuild the company back up again and, get it to the heights that I wanted. So that's what started me on the question of, okay, well, if I know that this isn't what I want to do, then what do I want to do? And then
Yeah,
that's when you start asking those questions, and sort of getting to a bit more of an understanding on your purpose and your passion and things like that. And I know that's a word that's banded around quite a lot, but it is something that's important. It's not necessarily something that is important. You don't need to worry if you don't know what your purpose is, but I would always encourage people searching it out, because that's how you start getting, trying out different things and becoming interested in different stuff, and that's when you start to sort of nail down what your purpose actually is. But for some people it takes years and years and years to find, and others it can come quickly. But for me, it's definitely something that I encourage all of my clients to look for, even if they haven't done so yet.
absolutely. And even some people who might think they've done so, it's a quest, so things might evolve as well along the way. So it's something always to make sure
Absolutely.
it's not being kept too far away from what you're doing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Shall we look at it on the other side, as in challenges side of things?
Oh,
I'm
yes.
curious. Tell me more. Tell me, what would you say
The
have been
challenges.
your top three?
Top three. So I think one of my biggest challenges for sure was getting into the wrong partnership with some people, I think maybe about 10 years ago or so now, so quite a long time. But I was still quite sort of new and young and naive to sort of the business and the industry, I suppose, at that point. And I partnered with the wrong people. And I went in with full
Mm,
trust. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't trust people, but at the same time, you still have to be very, very careful because you can be best friends 1 minute. And if something changes, and you might sit there and think, no, no, it will never change. They're brilliant people and we go for a beer every Friday night. And you think, okay, that's great, but you just don't know what's going to happen. And the problem is that a business could end up being sort of 5, 10, 15 years, in the making, and you don't know what your relationship is going to be like 10 years down the line. And unfortunately, that's the position I found myself in. And I had to extract myself from a business relationship that had got very sour. I felt that they were using me quite a lot for my abilities, but I wasn't necessarily getting the same back. And so I sort of
mm,
put myself out there and had a conversation with them and sort of said, look, I love working with you, but I also need to be able to sort of, do a couple of other things as well. Because they got a little bit controlling. They wanted me to be doing it. Everything I wanted to do, they were like, well, we want a part of it. And I was struggling at that point to see why, because I didn't really know what more that they brought to the table. And I didn't obviously necessarily say it quite like that to them, but I did sort of say, look, I need to be able to sort of do some things my way as well. They didn't like that at all. And ultimately, they sabotaged my business. And I
wow.
ended up losing everything that I'd worked for 18 months. So I,
No.
yeah, built a business and then it disappeared. And I had to start all over again from scratch, which is probably another reason why I guess I lost a bit of love for it, because it was very, very
Mm,
stressful. And, they were quite manipulative and all these sorts of different things. But at the same time, as horrible as it was going through it, this is what I say with everything, these are challenges, but I genuinely do see the positives in them. I wouldn't want to actively put myself in that position again, but
mm-hmm.
at the same time, I've learned so much about people. I've learned so much about contractual law. I've learned so much about business
Mm.
partnerships. I'm in a much better position now to be able to help my clients, to be able to sort of, understand where they're coming from, to be able to help them with any, contractual negotiations, to be able, all those sorts of different things, advise them on partnerships, that kind of thing. I would never be able to do that without having gone through this experience myself. So in the short term, it sucked. In the long term, it's made me a much better coach and a much better person and a much better businesswoman. So I don't see it as negatively as I did before, for sure. But it was definitely a challenge. I will tell you that for sure. When it was going on, it was not a nice experience to be a part of.
Of course.
So
And I'm
that was
sorry you had to go
one of
through
the
that.
things. Yeah, well, no, thank you. It's not something anyone really loves to go through, but like I say, it's you live and you learn, don't you?
100%. And like you said, it's one of those where when you're probably in the midst of it, it must have been such a dark tunnel to navigate. At the same time, like you said, this is something that you can tap into today to make sure that you support your clients to anticipate such potential situations to happen as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think I've always been that kind of person that when something's challenging, I try to I try to give myself some perspective, because it's
Mm.
easy when you're in the situation to be like, well, this is the end of the world.
Yeah,
It's all
yeah,
going to
true.
go, and
It's done.
it's
That's it. My life is
yeah,
over. Yeah, 100%.
that can make it, even more devastating, really.
Mm.
But I like to be able to take myself out of the situation and to be able to look on it as if I were an external party and
Mm-hmm.
think about my life in, a year or 18 months and be like, is this going to affect me in a year? Am I going to be
Great
doing the same
advice.
thing in 18 months?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was no. It would all be over. My life would be different. Okay, it wasn't what I'd planned or what I'd expected, but I wasn't going to feel this way forever. And knowing that you're not going to feel this way forever almost allowed me to sit in that sadness and sit
Yep.
in that grief for, everything that I was losing and, for the battles that I was going through and all that sort of stuff. And just be like, yeah, okay, this really sucks, but maybe it will suck a little less tomorrow. And maybe it will suck a little less next week. And before you know it, it will be a year down the line and it just won't suck anymore. It gets there slowly, 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 but it just allows you to stop panicking and to be able to just sort of take whatever it is that you're dealing with for its face value and be able to say, okay, well, let's just deal with today. It's not going to be brilliant, but that's fine because tomorrow may be better.
I think this is great advice. It's a hard one when you're in the midst of it, but I think it's a very important shift of mindset that could make all of the difference. What's next? Can't wait.
Oh, goodness. I would say I've definitely had challenges in hiring as well, the right people. Right. And that has been something that is obviously very important to a business. But if you hire the wrong person, which I think I've never hired like an outrageously bad person, but at the same time I've hired people that haven't necessarily lasted very long, or maybe they've done an okay job but not a brilliant job. And I think that can be hugely challenging because it's, people assume that when they hire somebody, their workload gets halved immediately, but that's actually not the case. You might be stressed as anything and you might be doing the work of 10 people. When you hire somebody, you'll need to do the work of 12 because you have to train them up. You have to, spot all of their work, and teach them everything from day one. And, they're not going to be as good as you. And I think that was another learning as well. People just, they assume that, well, I know how to do this and I do it this way and I expect it to be of this quality. Yeah. And then they pass it to somebody else. And you have to remember that it's not their business. So they might do a brilliant job. I'm not necessarily knocking their work, but they're not going to feel the way about your business that you feel. There are ways in which you can try and mitigate that. And there are definitely ways that you can, and this is one of the things I go through with my clients is, how to create that kind of company culture so that people, they do want to sort of embrace it as their own rather than just see it as the way that they pay their mortgage and their bills and for their food. But going in with the expectations that somebody is just going to smash it out the park and they're going to do all of this work and it's going to be amazing.
And the same way as well. I think you touch on a point very important, is that the way you work, you're expecting this to be done the same, but a person might do it slightly different. Not to mention the fact, like you were saying, that this is not the business. So their interest is not really the same as yours potentially.
Yeah. And you know what? I've seen so many people that I've had to say to them, let go a little bit because I think people get really caught up in, well, this is the way it has to be done because this is the way I do it. And I know that I do it well this way and therefore you must do it this way. But at the end of the day, do you want them to do it that way or do you want the result? If they find another way, is that not still okay if you still get the same result? In fact, you might even get a better result. You don't know.
True.
And I remember hearing there was one sort of social experiment that was done, many years ago now, but they were talking about who would be the best employee. And I think this was actually a quote from somebody on a podcast I was listening to, who would be the best employee? And the answer is smart, lazy person. Because if they're smart and lazy, they're going to try and find a shortcut to make it a quicker, to find a quicker way of doing things. So you don't necessarily want the person that is, working really, 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 really hard. You want the person that's going to work smart for you. And it's about being able to let go a little bit and just sort of say, you know what, if you find a different way of doing it, that's fine. But ultimately, this is what I need from you. And then just letting them decide how they want to do it.
Love that.
So I think for me, definitely the hiring process, I still think I'm improving as I go. And I'm sort of honing in on what you can do to help somebody become a part of your culture. But I think that's the thing, is that when I first started, I was just like, can you do the job? Do I like you? And can I spend time with you? And do I think that you're smart enough to be able to sort of understand what needs to be done? That's it. Okay, let's go. Whereas now I'm more interested to know about them and know about what they want to achieve in their life and know about what their goals are. And, do we have a shared mission? Especially running conscious businesses, a lot of what I do and my clients do is, it has a social or an environmental sort of aspect to it. And you need to be passionate about that. You need to love that because that's ultimately your soul message. It's the reason that you're doing what you're doing. And when you hire people, you want to get people involved that love the same idea. So if you haven't connected, they might be brilliant. They might come from MIT or they've graduated from Oxford, and that's, fantastic. But if they don't believe in what you're doing, they're never really going to see the job as something that they fully want to embrace themselves. And it might just be a stepping stone for them, and it won't necessarily be an opportunity that they will use to be there for a long time. So you could end up with sort of higher turnover of staff that way as well. So that's something that I've definitely learned is a crucial part to hiring people, which isn't necessarily something that is, a checkpoint on a piece of paper.
Yeah. And this is actually interesting you went there, because this is something I wanted to ask, like, what are you doing differently that you were not potentially doing before, which you just answered. And I think it goes back. So anyone listening to this, whether you are potentially running a business, recruiting, and or considering to scale, or even if you are actually employed and you're looking for your next opportunity, knowing your values, your personal values, and your mission is super key. Not only obviously for you, but exactly like you said, when you meet new people who you might have involvement with in a pretty intense basis, it's super important to understand, out of those values, which ones are the one that we have in common. Not to say you should be looking 100% for people where, the match is there, but at least having some alignment, because it prevents, like you were saying, being around with people who potentially just are not a match for you. And if anything, they might impact your self-confidence, they might slow you down, and you might just completely doubt yourself and your abilities, even though in the first place, it has nothing to do with you. It's just a conflict in potential values and missions.
Yeah, 100% agree.
All right, let's dive into the third and final one.
Oh, yes. Okay. I got sidetracked then. I was thinking all about values and things like that. I was like, yes, I'm getting into your speech there. And I completely forgot that I had a third one to go.
I mean, if we stop there, I mean, those were absolutely, critical ones. Happy, to not necessarily explore a third one, except if there is anything that comes to mind.
Trying to think what I would think is the biggest challenge. Oh, yeah. Okay. No, I do have one actually that I think might be potentially quite prevalent, I suppose.
Go for it.
The challenge that I would say has been hardest for me as well is balancing this with my life.
I was wondering if this might come up. There we are. Okay. Here it goes.
Yes, absolutely. I have two incredible children and an amazing husband, and my daughter is going to be turning 4 in November. My son is 4.5 months old at the moment. So I love spending time with them. I absolutely love it. And it's the most important thing for me. And, a lot of what I do is to spend time with them and to provide them the life that I would love to be able to provide. And, to be able to take them on holidays and, teach them incredible things and, all this sort of stuff. But that's very hard to do when you are building a business at the same time, because, it takes a lot out of you to build a business. There's a lot of things that you have to do, and there's lots of kind of connecting and working and emails, and especially at the very, very beginning, you've got that extra push. It's that exponential curve, isn't it? You've got that extra push where you don't really achieve a huge amount to begin with, because it's like pushing a rock up a hill. You've got to get the momentum going first, and so you need to do a lot of background work and branding and all these sorts of different things, and that takes time and effort and energy. And I definitely get mum guilt, because I sit there and I'm playing with my kids and I'm thinking, oh, but I still haven't done this, and this. But then I'm working and I'm thinking, oh, I can hear my husband playing with my kids downstairs and I would really love to be able to join. So, it's hard to get that balance. And I think the one thing that I have found for me personally, and I don't know if this works for anybody else, but for me, it's regular consistency rather than sort of pockets of work. So I tend to find it, if I'm working, I could do loads and loads of work, but then I'd feel guilty that I'm not sort of spending any time with my kids. But then if I then spend sort of 3 or 4 days going off and doing loads of different things with the kids, but no work, first of all, my brain needs time to get back into it. And I suddenly sort of think, oh gosh, hang on a minute, where was I with this document? And it takes 20 minutes to figure it all out, get back into the zone, and then, start working again. But also I start to get a little bit more sort of stressed that I'm not achieving anything. Whereas if I can do a little bit more regularly, then I know that I'm not too far away from being able to, like, if there's something I've forgotten, to get done, or I think, oh, actually, yeah, I really do need to do that. I don't need to think, oh, I can't do anything for 4 days now,
Mm.
I can, go, okay, well, I'm going to do an hour later, and I'm going to do some, tomorrow morning. And just having that conversation with my husband as well, and making sure that he's on board and he understands this. He works for a large consulting firm in central London. So he ordinarily, obviously he's on maternity at the moment, but he ordinarily, works long hours. But it's very, very different, I suppose, to a startup when, sometimes I do need to work in the evening. Very fortunately, he absolutely understands that. He's done this before, so he gets that. But it's about being open, having that conversation, making sure that they're on board and they understand why you're doing it. And then for me, it's keeping consistent amounts of work going, so that you don't get periods of 4 or 5 days where you don't do anything, and then suddenly your brain's like, oh gosh, yeah, sorry, I probably should be doing something, because then you get frustrated that you're not moving as quickly as you want to. So that for me it's an ongoing, consistent challenge, I think. I haven't quite mastered it just yet, but I'm definitely getting there, and I'm trying to work out what's most important to me. But I know a lot of people suffer from mum guilt, because a lot of my clients have said exactly the same thing. So yeah, for anyone who's listening and is, then don't fret, you are not alone. It is definitely a thing, but it's just about trying to work out the way that it's going to work for you, and just being kind on yourself as well. It's really hard being a mum, and it's really hard being a businesswoman, and it's really, really hard being both at the same time. So give yourself a little bit of credit, and also stop comparing yourself to people who are not in the same position as you. I heard this from one of my mentors. She was saying that in her industry, she always compared herself to this one other woman, and this other woman seemed to be flying ahead, and she was constantly trying to keep up, and she felt like she was in constant competition with her. And actually, when she came to eventually meet this woman and talk to her, they both had a laugh, because she was saying, I'm constantly in awe of everything that you can do. And this woman turned around and said, well, hang on a minute, I've got no family, no partner at the moment, so I've got all the time in the world to go networking, do all these sorts of different things, whereas you don't, because she had twins. And she said, well, I'm actually in awe of you. You've got everything I'd like. I want a partner and I want kids, but I don't have them. So you might sit there and think, oh, that person's better than me, or that person's going faster than me, and you just don't know, number one, what it is that they want, or what they might be battling with. But also, just make sure you're comparing to the right people, or even better, don't compare, because at the end of the day, you should only really be competing with yourself. But in reality, I know that we look at other people and sometimes we can get a bit despondent, but the step before being able to not compare at all is make sure at least that you're taking perspective into consideration, and that you're comparing with people that are on a similar footing to yourself.
Absolutely. Not that I love what you shared, in the sense that, yes, it definitely seems, I think the word balance comes into play a lot. Mom guilt, I've heard this time and time again as well. So I know there are a lot of components there, but thank you so much as well for not only sharing your own journey through this, but also what potentially is available for anyone who might be navigating this. And this actually led to the final part of the podcast, which is, I'd love to hear, additionally to what you said, and to be honest, those were very much valuable pieces of feedback that you gave and advice. Any other tips that you'd like to share for anyone listening to this episode and wondering how to make it work in terms of aligning their career with truly who they are? Because I know this is obviously a passionate topic of yours.
I think for me, well, absolutely. Number one is making sure that you're starting something that you truly have a love in, and it's not necessarily just a sort of, I guess, a passion in terms of a hobby, because sometimes hobbies should just be left as hobbies. You've probably heard this sort of saying of, if I made this into a business, it suddenly becomes something that I don't do for enjoyment. I do it because I have to, and that can take the fun out of certain things. So there's a difference between knowing, the kind of things that you enjoy, but then the kind of things that mean more. So this is why, when sort of passion becomes a bit more like purpose, because, and again, this is another reason why so many women now are thriving running conscious businesses or social businesses, because we as women just naturally love helping, and knowing that we're doing something good, and seeing something good come of what it is that we're trying to achieve, and having that additional meaning over and above, oh, if I make this business a success, I can, I can get more money and I can go on more holidays, or I can buy a bigger house, or I can,
Yep.
take my kids out. That's lovely and that's great. But knowing that you're doing something even bigger, and knowing that huge why is a massive thing to help you strive when you're in tough times, which will come along. But it also just means that you're more likely to stick at it. And, we were talking about the business failure rate. A lot of the time that can be because someone tries a business, goes, oh, I thought I'd really enjoy this. Very much like me with property. I jumped in and I didn't really ask myself enough questions to work out, what I actually really did want to be doing.
Yeah.
And I ended up, thinking I was doing the right thing. And yes, I'm following my passion. I love property. And ended up falling into something that ultimately I really, really hated. But if there is a bigger meaning and a bigger why behind what you're doing, then you're far less likely statistically to get yourself in that position where, you're a few years into the business and you're just, you're drowned out, you've done too much work, it's not really going the way that you wanted it to. It's at that point that if you've got that bigger why, you're more likely to succeed. I would definitely say, try to ask yourself those questions. What is it that is my why? Why am I here? What is it that I'm going to be thinking about on my deathbed and think, oh, I'm so proud that I've achieved that. That's what my life was about. And try and factor that into your business. And definitely consider a conscious business. If anybody is sort of, at the start of a business or thinking about starting one, this is another topic for another day, but they are absolutely the future of business, I believe. And
Absolutely.
there are so many benefits for everybody, not just yourselves, but for everybody, for the more, conscious businesses that we can start around the world. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for it and happy to talk to anybody that wants to know more about them.
Amazing. Laura, I've got one final question for you. What would be the one word summarizing the conversation we just had together today?
Oh, inspiring, I'd say. I really enjoyed that. I hope you agree, obviously, but
yes,
I'd say
absolutely.
that it was pretty inspiring.
I'll take it. Inspiring. Absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you so much, because I have to say, you're right. It has been inspiring. I think it has gave me personally food for thoughts. I think it was very, very interesting to dive into some of your journey, specific experiences that you've had, but also what you just shared here at the end. So thank you so much for coming in, Laura.
Oh, not a problem at all. I've loved it. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.